as I was studying Nehemiah, and as you go through Ezra and Nehemiah, there are a number of things that are difficult to understand from a timeline perspective, what's going on. And so I spent a lot of time looking at a resource that I found that actually a friend of mine put together, that he and his father have spent years putting this timeline together, going through every verse in the Bible. Everywhere there's a mention of something, and it's pinned to a particular moment in history, the year and month of a king, or the season of the year, or the day and the month, whatever, and they started building this timeline out. They also started looking at extra biblical resources, Babylonian Chronicles and other things. And I highly encourage you to look at it. You will find there are some variations between it and other timelines you will run into on the internet. And I won't say, oh, this is absolutely the correct one, because there's still some things up in the air. But I have to say, when I go through it, and he references all the documents and the verses that things come from, it's hard to argue with it, and it makes a ton of sense as you go through it. So I encourage you to look at it. You'll find it, the title at the top of the timeline here says excerpts from Exploring Through the Bible. So if you search on YouTube for Exploring Through the Bible, and for some odd reason you have to run it all together with no spaces, Exploring Through the Bible on YouTube, and you will find the site, and he's got all kinds of little videos that help just walk you through piece by piece a lot of the history of the Bible, and it's fascinating. And he's built a spreadsheet called timeline.pdf that you can download from there, and literally he has started from creation, and year by year there's a single row for every single year going forward, and every single thing that can be placed they have placed into this timeline. It's just fascinating, and what you have here is just a tiny excerpt from that, and I'll explain how it works, but it's fascinating, and I encourage you to look at the master documents from this. As we go through here, I know that some of you who have studied history will go, hey, well, that's not placed quite where I would place it, or where others have placed it. Yeah, you're right. But you'll see how things are documented here, and we won't spend class time bickering the differences between this and other timelines. I just want you to see this one, and happy to talk with you afterwards about other things you have found that may or may not agree with this one. Unlike today, like today, where we have a timeline that starts with the presumed year of Jesus' birth, and then we started numbering forward, so now we're in 2024, which is supposedly 2,024 years after the birth of Jesus. This column starts with the flood and begins to number years forward. When you look at the master timeline document, you also have the timeline starting from creation as year 0 and going forward. Because back in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra, and back in the days of Noah, and back in the days of Adam and Eve, they didn't use BC, understandably. They used dates that made sense to them, and things were marked going forward, just like we do now. So you can start with creation, you can start with the flood, and then you start with these years. So the numbers, like that very first number, 1663, is 1,663 years since the flood. The columns are different kingdoms. So the first column after the date column is Judah. So this is what's going on in Judah in each of these years. Then you have Babylon, Media, and Persia. Israel is not considered on this chart, because by the time this chart begins, Israel is already off, the northern kingdom is already off in captivity in Assyria, never to return. But some things, they are not forgotten. You will find them still in this timeline as we go through, and I'll point out where. So let's go through this. I don't want to go so fast that it's not understandable, but I also don't necessarily want to take all 45 minutes going through here. But as I was studying the timeline, I just realized, for all the stuff that I had prepared from Nehemiah chapter 12 and trying to figure out what to do with those lists of names, I realized this is, I think, a more valuable study, and will help you understand the rest of Ezra and Nehemiah and lots of other things. So let's take some time to go through this. So we're going to start out in the first row, 1663, all right? This is Josiah's 26th year. Josiah is the king in Judah. He has been king for 26 years. Now, You will remember, if you have read it before, that 8 years prior, in Josiah's 18th year, one of the priests, Hilkiah, had found the book of the law in the temple, brought it out, read it to Josiah, and Josiah is horrified to find out that surely God is incredibly angry with them and is going to bring on this giant calamity on Judah. And it has been prophesied at this point that they will go off into captivity. Remember, Manasseh, the worst king Judah ever has, is Josiah's grandfather. And Josiah is desperately trying to dig them out of that hole, but he knows that this calamity is coming, and so he humbles himself and prays to God. God comes back and promises to Josiah, because you have humbled yourself, this calamity will not take place in your lifetime. So that happens in Josiah's 18th year and is in 2 Kings 22, 19 through 20. Jump ahead, and here we are in Josiah's 26th year, in 1663. Meanwhile, in the other kingdoms, in Babylon, Nabopolassar is king. He is the father of Nebuchadnezzar. But Nabopolassar is still king. In Media, Cyaxares is king. He is the father of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is the future husband of Esther. And then Persia, ignoring the kings for a moment, but Persia is underneath the Medes. So the Medes are ruling their area and the Persians are underneath them. Now, go back to Babylon for a moment. Nabopolassar is king. Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar marries the daughter of Cyaxares, king of Media, producing a Babylonian-Media alliance. And at this point, Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabopolassar, and Ahasuerus, son of Cyaxares, are now brothers-in-law. So you have that interesting marital alliance. That also means that Nebuchadnezzar in the future will be Esther's brother-in-law. Imagine that connection. Imagine that Thanksgiving family dinner. All right. Jump ahead 2 years to 1665, and over in Media, you have Media and Babylon overthrow Assyria and divide the Assyrian Empire between them. The Israelites, who were from the northern kingdom, who were previously scattered among Assyria, are now scattered among what is now Media and will become part of the Persian Empire. So we have that change. 3 years later, in 1668, Pharaoh Necho out of Egypt will come up and want to pass through Israel, but Josiah will come out to try to stop him. Pharaoh Necho kills Josiah, captures Jehoahaz, his son, and makes Jehoiakim, who was not in line for the throne, makes Jehoiakim king, and that's in 2 Kings 23. At this moment, we have the 70 years of captivity beginning, because this is the year, one, Josiah has now died, and so God's promise to him is kept, that he has not seen the captivity, but this is the year that all future kings that Judah will have are now under the thumb of some foreign king. They will not have a king of their own, by their own authority, ever again. So the 70-year count begins here. Jump ahead 4 years, and Nebuchadnezzar becomes king in Babylon. Jehoiakim, who has been left behind by Necho, Jehoiakim is taken prisoner to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar because he had revolted against Nebuchadnezzar. Jump ahead a year, Jehoiakim wises up and agrees to serve Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar returns Jehoiakim to Judah as Nebuchadnezzar's vassal. That same year, Ahasuerus, son of Cyaxares, becomes king of the Medes. 2 years later, in 1675, Queen Vashti will refuse to come to King Ahasuerus, and she will be removed as queen of the Medes. 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes back and carries away more captives in his 7th year, including Esther and Mordecai, and they get taken off, and Esther is taken to Susa, along with many young women. And you have that in Esther 2, 5 through 7. By the way, in each of these scriptures that are put in here, it's not just because that's the scripture in which that happens. That's also the scripture in which it references the date in the 2nd year of da-da-da-da, or the 3rd year in the 7th month, and da-da-da-da. So you can actually go back and use that verse to pin that to this moment in the history. Next year, Jehoiakim, back in Judah, Jehoiakim has not learned his lesson, and he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar and is killed by Nebuchadnezzar. His son Jehoiachin is taken captive, and Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah as king. Nebuchadnezzar carries away more Jewish captives into the foreign countries. That's also the same year that Esther becomes queen of the Medes, marrying Ahasuerus. The next year, as most newly married couples do, they have a child. Darius the Mede is born to Ahasuerus and Esther. 4 years later, Haman casts lots to set a date for the destruction of the Jews. He wants to destroy the Jews in Babylon, but also the Israelites and the Jews that are scattered throughout the former Assyrian kingdom, which is now part of the Medo-Persian kingdom. So he wants to wipe them all out wherever they may be. Esther and Mordecai foil his plot. I meant to show you this map while you're looking, so you can see where these different kingdoms are. You've got Egypt, Babylon. By the way, Israel is now swallowed up into Babylon. And you have the Median kingdom, and you see Persia down kind of in the southern end of the green area, part of Media. Okay. Esther and Mordecai foil his plot, and at the end of the book, the Feast of Purim, or Feast of Lots, is established. And by the way, if you've looked at your calendar, your own calendar, Purim starts next Sunday. So you will see, even modern Jews celebrating their, salvation from the enemies who would wipe them off the face of the earth. They are still celebrating their salvation from that. I'll give you a little fun tidbit. Sometimes it's fun to have a wife that is Jewish, and you can, I'll show you a little bit. You will see in stores, bakeries and whatnot, these little cookies called Hamantaschen. They are known as Haman's pockets, or one of my favorite words for it is in Hebrew, it's called Otznei Haman, or Haman's ears, Haman's ears. And so a little bit of dig at Haman, just in a little cookie. So they're remembering their history with that. 6 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes into Judah and burns the temple, breaks down the city walls, and the houses are destroyed. And I put that in there of specific note, not only because the temple and the walls are torn down, which we've been reading about their reconstruction in Ezra and Nehemiah, but in Jeremiah 52, 12 through 14, that's where you read that the houses of Jerusalem are destroyed. And it says every major house in Jerusalem was destroyed. Remember, just on Wednesday, we were talking about, hey, how come not many people are living in Jerusalem? They've got to cast lots to, bring some people back into the city. Jeremiah has confirmed way back when this city was captured, they destroyed not just the walls, but every place you could practically live in there. So it is not a particularly habitable city. So it's going to take some work to get people back living there. Jump ahead another 8 years, we get to come to the last row here, and we have Nebuchadnezzar's 7-year madness. Now you'll remember from the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar sees this disturbing dream, and Daniel comes to interpret it for him. And he tells him, because you have been arrogant before God, he is going to send you out, and you're going to eat grass like the field, and your hair is going to grow like feathers and whatnot. Nebuchadnezzar, the following year, hasn't learned his lesson. He goes out on his balcony, and he's talking about, this kingdom that I have built for myself, and blah, blah, blah. And he immediately receives, the fulfillment of that prophecy. And his 7-year madness begins. He becomes incapable of leadership whatsoever. He goes out and he is indeed eating grass in the field like cows and whatnot. And so Artaxerxes, king of Persia, is installed as a temporary king of Babylon under Ahasuerus of the Medes. Because remember, the Persians are still under the Medes. So Ahasuerus, Esther's husband, king of the Medes, installs Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes, and this is the Artaxerxes that we read about in Nehemiah and Ezra, Artaxerxes will later return to Persia when his time in Babylon is finished. Now, let's turn over the page. And here at the top in the Judah column, you'll see I put Ezra and Nehemiah. So this page now covers really primarily the events of Ezra and Nehemiah. So in 1704, from the flood, 6 years after the previous line, we have Ezra departs Babylon in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Ezra arrives in Judah that same year with priests, Levites, singers, and gatekeepers. Now it's important who returns with him, okay? Keep that in mind for a moment. Jump ahead 12 years from the 7th year of Artaxerxes. We jump ahead and we get to over in Persia. In the 20th year of Artaxerxes, Nehemiah gets word in Susa of the distress in Judah, and we have the book of Nehemiah begin. Okay, 20th year of Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes has finished in Babylon, he's gone back to Susa, and that is where Nehemiah is serving him. The next year, Nehemiah rebuilds the walls using those who returned with Ezra. Remember the description, the priests, Levites, singers, and gatekeepers. And remember when we studied the rebuilding of the wall, you had this odd mix of people who don't seem like masons and bricklayers and whatnot. Those are the people who had come home. Those were the people who had returned with Ezra, and that's who he's got to work with. And that's who he builds the wall with. 10 years later, Ahasuerus, going back out into the other kingdoms, Ahasuerus the Mede, Esther's husband, attacks Persia. But his own army revolts and hands him over to Cyrus, the king of Persia. And at that point, you have a flip in power. And instead of the Persians being under the Medes, Persia is now over the Medes and becomes the controlling empire. The next year, Nabonidus in Babylon, Nabonidus, who is now the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's been reigning for quite a while at this point, he semi-retires. And Belshazzar becomes essentially co-ruler of Babylon. So Nabonidus is not dead, but he's not really doing his job anymore. So Belshazzar comes in and rules Babylon in his absence. The next year, in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, Nehemiah returns to Susa, and we'll read that in Nehemiah 13. Nehemiah returns to Susa. Then, 9 years later, 1738, we reach the end of captivity, and here's why. First of all, in Judah, I'll point out that it says in Nehemiah 13:6, the same verse where it says he went back to Susa and Artaxerxes, it says after some time Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem, but it never says where. So all we know is that sometime after he left to go to Susa, he comes back. It could be years later, it could be the next year, but it's a while later. It's anywhere from 1738 onward, or 1729 onward, really. Over in Media, let's look at what's happening in Media and Persia. In Media, Darius, the son of Esther and Ahasuerus, becomes king of the Medes. In Persia, Cyrus, the son of Artaxerxes, becomes king of Persia. So you have the same year, you have Darius and Cyrus become king of their kingdoms, and they begin to reign at the same time as each other. But Media is still under Persia. In Babylon, this is the year that Belshazzar sees the handwriting on the wall, that mysterious hand, during the big party where he's called out for all the gold articles from the temple in Jerusalem, and they're drinking out of these cups. Sees the handwriting on the wall, and he's killed that very same night when the Persians and Medians, when Darius and Cyrus come and conquer and divide Babylon between them. And it says in Daniel chapter 5, that Darius the Mede received the kingdom of Babylon. So presumably Cyrus, who is over Darius, has granted that Darius will then rule Babylon. So he receives the kingdom from Cyrus. Also that same year, now that Darius is king, you have his chief leaders presumably trying to pull one over on Darius. And in the Media column, you have Darius is tricked into sending Daniel to the lion's den. Daniel prospers nonetheless during the reigns of Darius and Cyrus, and you read that in Daniel chapter 6. Now seeing who Darius is and all that's going on between these kingdoms, you begin to understand why Darius would be particularly sympathetic to Daniel. Darius is the son of Esther. So Darius, if you want to say it, is half Jewish. And so he's more, you can imagine him being more sympathetic to Daniel, not just because he's a good advisor to him. The next year, out in Persia, in essentially the first full year of Cyrus's reign of Persia. So Cyrus issues a decree to build the temple and allow the Jews to return home, and that's in 2 Chronicles 36. When that decree comes out, go over to the Judah column, Zerubbabel returns to Judah with about 50,000 people, and that's recorded in Ezra 2. The Feast of Booths is kept, which is recorded in Ezra 3 and Nehemiah 8, which we read earlier, but the temple foundation is not yet laid, as it will record in that same chapter, chapter 3. The next year, temple work begins, and the local governor Tatanai sends letters to Darius in Babylon, asking to verify their authority to build. In the process of doing that, Darius finds Cyrus's decree. And remember, Darius is under Cyrus. Darius doesn't have the authority to just say, oh, hey, go ahead and build. He's got to confirm with his overlord, Cyrus, that it's okay. Cyrus's decree is found, and so he issues the decree back and says, yep, Cyrus said it's okay, go ahead and build. 4 years later, the temple is completed in the 6th year of Darius, son of Esther. So, if you're like me, you're going to have to digest all of that for a while and go back and look at it. But it's fascinating to look and see what's happening between all these kings, and you begin to understand a little more and have some insight into why different things happen. Or when it talks about Darius, King Darius, or King Cyrus, or King Belshazzar, how they fit in the picture of what's going on with Judah and this whole captivity. So, now, let's get into Nehemiah chapter 12.